looking like breeze.
So there's an article that was released by The Hill, and it's an op-ed piece, and it talks about industry best practices for cybersecurity. And it proceeds to list out a bunch of things around role-based access control and separation of duties implemented and taken to the extreme, where technology personnel that could be valuable in responding to a cyber incident, whether they be server admins or network admins or the like, are prevented from being able to do their job holistically because of an extreme case of separation of duties and role-based access control.
Right. I think that this is good, but before we go further, let me actually do the introduction. Hello, and welcome to the Anexinet Infrastructure Modernization Podcast. Here on AIM, we invite industry professionals and subject matter experts on to discuss current trends and technology topics. This is going to be a slightly different episode, as it's going to be myself talking to my co-host, Dave Mahoney, about Dave Mahoney. Wait, no, that's not right. About security in general. So, yeah, and we'll link the article that we're talking about in the show notes. But to me, that article reeked of somebody that got an idea in their head, has never actually managed systems in the real world, had some level of credentials, and apparently nobody vetting what they wrote, and just wrote ridiculous things that are wrong.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, well, again, it's all about extreme. So it is an op-ed piece, first of all. So there's a lot of people that are commenting on the article called "Our Cybersecurity Industry Best Practices Keep Allowing Breaches." That's the title of the article. And it is an op-ed piece. So they're allowed to write whatever they want because it's an opinion. So that's fair. However, this opinion is, if read by inexperienced people that don't really have a good security background, it could be damaging. But let's just be thankful for the moment that, one, it's being hosted on the Hill's website, which, I'm not exactly going to the Hill for my cybersecurity body of knowledge that I maintain. And
no, I normally just go to Teen Vogue.
They probably have more security knowledge, general security knowledge, given their readers and audience than this gentleman. But so those are all good things that it has going for it. It's on the Hill, who cares, right? Not that there's anything wrong with them. It's just I'm not going to them for cybersecurity advice. And then it is an opinion piece. So, let's take it for what it is, and it's not meant to be written as a true educational piece of knowledge that people are supposed to act on necessarily. But right. It obviously spurred some significant debate based on the comments. Did you read any of them?
Oh, yeah. What I noticed and what I really wanted to get into in particular is what I hear from what he's writing is a fundamental misunderstanding of what security practices mean, why they're important, and how to implement them correctly, right? Because the one thing, first of all, this guy obviously has, an axe to grind when he talks about security professionals as saying that they're really good at pushing paper.
Yeah.
But the separation of duties that you were talking about before in terms of security is critical. This is worth quoting because I think it points out the misunderstanding. He says, quote, "A network engineer, for instance, does not have the tools or access to investigate the activity occurring on an innocuous sales department workstation at 3 a.m. A server administrator lacks the access to explore why the network throughput seems painfully slow while trying to copy files." He paints this as a bad thing, and I think that there's a problem with that.
So I don't, actually. I think that he's right. I think that there is a boundary of separation of duties that creates diminishing returns, right? There is a pivot point where you create security through obscurity as opposed to good security. But this isn't a new problem. Like this is something that came up years and years. I mean, it's got to be well over a decade, right? Where this whole separation of duties thing, I don't even remember. It had to be over a decade ago when this was like really, really hot topic, at least in the world that I was in. And it was because organizations were building their IT departments into those traditional silos, right? You have the server guys, you got the network guys, you got the security guys, you got the app guys, et cetera, et cetera. And they didn't want to have a lot of cross-function because organizations were struggling with things like change control, right? They wanted to have these silos of responsibility because it enabled them to have this very flowing change control process where, well, I need to make a change to the server to deploy a system or an application. Okay, great. Well, these guys are going to do that because they know that area. And then we got to make changes to the network so that we can present it to the world. Well, I only want the network guys doing that because they're going to make sure that all the networking stuff is taken care of. And then to limit any kind of cross-pollination or pollution of the change system, we're going to make sure that these people can't access stuff. And that happened for a long time. And then finally, everybody went, this is insane. We can't operate a business this way because IT can't get anything done. We've made IT, which we are now relying on more and more because digital transformation and, the digital age and Web 2.0 and all that other stuff was kind of on the cusp. And we made IT this bottleneck. And everybody said, we've got to stop doing this. This is ridiculous. And so the entire world has come around like full circle and said, we're going to have cross-functional teams and we're going to have cross-functional tools so that people can get access to the data that they need to be effective. And that's what cybersecurity is supposed to do, by the way, right? It's provide data to the people that need to have it to be effective to do their job and to enable the business to make money faster, better, more, stronger, pick an adjective, but be secure and confidential while doing it.
I think you're absolutely right. And that finding that tipping point is important. But I think that where this guy completely goes off the deep end is in his conclusion when he says, and I'm going to quote again, grant network engineers administrative access to the server cluster. Grant developers access such that network or workstation anomalies can be fully investigated. Those are two enormously different categories when it comes to access.
Oh, they're
right?
completely different things. That doesn't even,
right.
The two things together don't even make sense. Why in the world would I want a guy who lives in Cisco iOS, right? Or networking iOS, whatever, pick a vendor. Why would I want him in a server making changes in either a non-production application or a production application when that's not his primary role and responsibility? I don't, right? I don't want him doing that. If he needs to know something and do some sort of cross-functional troubleshooting, well, let's provide him the tools and the availability he needs to look at the data to accomplish that task without sacrificing the security of the system. And that's why we have tools like monitoring of network and server. And that's why everybody is looking for tools that are consolidated, right? Single panes of glass to look at performance and availability and uptime and capacity and trend analysis. That's why those tools exist, and that's why they're so popular, and that's why we embrace them as a not only a managed service provider, but a managed security service provider. You have cross-functional tools so that you can have people do a number of things and enable developers to troubleshoot things holistically without giving away the keys to the kingdom and letting them, do things that could be potentially damaging. It's a non-issue at this point. The guy's 10 or 15 years out of date, as far as I'm concerned. That's my biggest problem with this whole thing. This has already been solved.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point that we should explore a little bit. So back in that day, and I have a certain amount of sympathy because I remember being, a young system administrator with dozens upon dozens of systems and not really knowing what to do about it. But back then you would have a syslog server and you would just dump all your logs in the syslog server. You would write these ridiculously complicated grep commands when you wanted to find something. But now we have more active security tools that take a better posture on logs. So when you see the past, which in my mind, I'm using the past and I'm doing air quotes here. The past is just passively watching logs or passively going through them when you think there's a problem. And then active security, like a SIM, for example. It's a world of difference.
Oh, completely. I mean, different sides of the moon, right? But it's not just security. I mean, it's ops in general. It doesn't just apply to security, right? It applies to all of operations, really.
What did that world look like when it was just passively collecting logs, not necessarily doing anything with them? And then having these full-sized, holistic environments that pull the logs, but also can make connections between what's happening on server A and switch B and say, hey, we see a problem here.
Aggregation and correlation of data points.
Yeah, sure. If you want to be summarizing it, then that's fine.
I'll try not to do that anymore. Is that one of Chris Hayner's pet peeves?
I get paid by the word, man. I'm like God. Charles Dickens over here.
So yeah, I mean, The simple fact of the matter is that I think that, and again, this is an opinion. I don't know that I would state this as a fact, but my opinion is that the proactive security and monitoring, which is really driven by aggregation and correlation of data points across the system, right? And so when I say system, I don't mean an individual component of a system. I mean a system at large, which could include the end user communication, the web portal, the app tier, the data tier, the network, the load balancing, right? That's a system. When you put all those things together and create a function, and that function serves some kind of value, that's a system, or at least that's how I'm using the term system in this case. So proactive monitoring of a system, I think, was really late to the game. It's really something that we've really only gotten good at within the past maybe about 15 years. There probably were some early adopters and people that were doing some cool things early on, but as far as generally available or general consumption, I think that that's really happened within the past 15 years. But that's exactly why we needed to invest in those things, because it was woefully inadequate to do exactly what you talked about, right? The idea, the concept of a syslog server that just collected all of these, flat file data logs from discrete systems, and then trying to go through and use timestamps, like you said, complicated grep commands, and looking at timestamps and then trying to correlate events, with a guy with dual monitors and a notepad file on each screen was just horrendous. And then the concept of dumping all that information into a relational database, right, that captured all the relevant metadata that you needed for various events and what happened and from what systems and what times, and then could draw conclusions for you programmatically, really just kind of spurred us, light years into the future. But we were just so late to the game. I think we should have been there so much sooner. But I really do think cybersecurity, even in today's day and age with this threat-rich environment, I think that we're always coming at things from behind because we're responding to threats as they occur. It's like walking down a dark, in a major metropolitan center city area, and walking down a dark alley in the middle of the night with your hands in your pockets and your head staring down at the ground, only focusing on putting one foot in front of the other, getting mugged, and then deciding to take precautions, right? That's how I feel like cybersecurity has been handled just kind of in general throughout the world.
Right. And we've gotten into a growth area where, especially moving into the cloud, two things have happened. One, it's not physically in your sight anymore. It's just someone else's computer, blah, blah, blah. The point is that it's far away. So it's not something that you're even thinking about. And two, the amount of logs that these services can create, I feel, has increased astronomically. And if you don't have assistance from something like a SIM, something that can identify trends, and in some of the more advanced tools and services that are available, can actually check a threat vector against other customers' experiences, known bad signatures. If you don't have that kind of thing, you're leaving yourself open to unnecessary risk.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's not even known bad signatures. We've taken it a step farther, right? I mean, we talked to our friends at AlertLogic. Known bad signatures is one thing, but the ability to analyze patterns of behavior or of attack behavior that don't have a signature, right? It's a pattern of behavior from something new that's in the wild. And then being able to see that across their customer bases, because they're collecting all of these logs from different organizations and de-identifying them and aggregating and correlating at that level, right? Multiple organizations, multiple parts of the globe, states, industries, yada, 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 et cetera. And then drawing conclusions is just even more powerful. So now we've got, signatures, we've got behavioral analysis. Groups take credit for stuff, right? And they tend to sign their work in different ways. So we're using that word signatures a little bit differently there. I think we've just come so far from where we used to be. But this concept that this guy in this article from The Hill, restrictive role-based access and separation of duties is the cause for all of our problems, right? And all these people that have these impressive credentials, CISSP, CISA, et cetera, and they push these quote unquote, he says, industry best practices, but really all they do is write 100-page missives and push paper. He's obviously had a bad experience with some security people. And I'm not even going to say that that I haven't had similar experiences, because I most certainly have. There are security people out there that really should be taken out back behind the shed and beat with baseball bats. No doubt about it. But he's blaming security people for everything.
What it feels like to me is he's blaming the security industry for the faults or the observed faults or the slights that he's endured. He's collecting the security industry and just blaming what he experienced on the entire world, which is excessive to say the least.
Couldn't agree more. But the most glaring part of this problem that I don't know if people aren't talking about it or if it's just really going unnoticed. I don't know, or if it's a blame game. I'm not sure. The part that bugs me is that as a cybersecurity professional, regardless of your level, right, whether you're the chief security officer or a security analyst, somebody else owns that business. There's a CEO or an owner or something. Everything that company does is ultimately that person's responsibility. And I know for a fact, as a security professional, and even when I wasn't a security professional, when you go to people and say, hey, I just wanted to make you aware, I feel like there's a concern, there's some risk here, and I feel like we might want to take some action to close this gap or close this risk or at least mitigate it. And some of it's just work that we can do. So, we'll take those as actions, and here's what we're doing to move things forward. But by the way, there really are some better things we can do that might cost a little bit of money, right? Like moving from reactive to proactive monitoring, right? And adopting a SIM or privileged access management. I don't know, pick a topic, right? But there's usually some sort of financial implication. Or, hey, we in order to close these gaps, we need to do things better operationally and procedurally. But we really don't have the staff to be able to do that, right? It's a full-time job, and we don't have the resources. Here's where everybody's allocated, and this is how their time is being spent. And if as you can see, we just don't have the capacity to do this. You're not making that decision. You're providing evidence, right? And then somebody else has to make a decision to say, what you told me, I acknowledge it, and I see the risk, and I agree with you that is a risk, or I don't agree with you that that's a risk for these reasons, and therefore this is the decision that I'm going to make. That doesn't come from the security people. That comes from the executive and senior management, because they are the ones that are ultimately responsible and accountable for addressing risk by setting policy and governance that the rest of us follow. And so people like Colonial Pipeline and SolarWinds and et cetera, if their technology environment was non-compliant with their own policies and procedures, that's a problem that the cybersecurity professionals should be held accountable for, because there was policy, there was procedure, and then people weren't doing their due diligence to make sure that those things were being adhered to and followed.
Right.
That's an issue. But what if those policies and procedures didn't exist or weren't up to snuff because of senior management? And so that's the part where you can't just blame the security people. You have to look at the entire picture and then say, all right, how much are these owners responsible for this? Because they really didn't they didn't take their risk mitigation seriously. That's the part that gets me.
Right, because my observation along these lines is very similar. And it seems to me like in the olden days, people may have thought about security as its own thing, as a separate section of your IT department. But in this day and age, security has to be part of everything that you do. It has to be front of mind. It has to be part of the development process. It has to be part of your operations process. It's not its own thing. It's baked into everything else the company is doing. And if you don't think about it that way, then you run into the situation that you're talking about, where you're asking your IT staff to make a decision that is budgetary and is not responsible when it comes to data protection or general security, and making sure that you don't have the kind of hacks that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think really up until 2020, I think people thought that security was just like insurance. I think that was the common thread. Well, yep. We need to be secure, but we only need to be so secure to make ourselves feel like we can sleep at night. And the chances, and nobody cares about my business. I'm washing cars, and I take credit card information, and it's on a website, but it's a hosted website, and it says it's secure. I have a little lock screen or a little lock icon up in the top of the browser when I go to my page, and that was enough.
Right. Nothing bad has ever happened at WordPress.com.
Oh, geez, don't get me started on WordPress. I mean, but I really don't think until 2020, I don't think people really got it, that criminals are out there and they don't care what your business is. They're after money, right? And the whole, this COVID climate and everybody being online and at home, I think everybody thinks a hacker is just some guy who's, relatively malkept and lives in a basement, right? And just has monitors all over the room and drinks too much Red Bull and plays video games and doesn't have a normal life outside of that. That's not true. Some of the people that are out there doing this stuff are high school students. They're script kiddies that have nothing better to do than sit around on a computer all day, unsupervised, and mess with people. There used to be a pattern of behavior back when I was in school where people would purposely break into banks and institutions and they would do absolutely nothing except leave behind a notepad file that said, I was here and this is how I got in, pay me or I'm going to the press. They wouldn't encrypt anything. They wouldn't steal anything. They would simply leave a text file that said, this is how I got in, pay me or I'm going to the press. And it was legal extortion. Because the banks and the companies would pay because they didn't want to have the negative brand reputation to know that people were able to breach their systems and do that. And so it was legal extortion, essentially.
Exactly what you just said, the fact that they would be afraid to say something out loud is one of the things that allowed some of the more professional, and I can't believe that I have to continually say this out loud, but ransomware as a service is a thing that exists. One of the reasons that it has blossomed is that a lot of targets just quietly pay the ransom to avoid the embarrassment of having to say out loud, my company was attacked and the bad guys won.
Well, exactly right. And that's part of the reason why these privacy laws now require that if you're breached and you're aware of it, you have X amount of time to notify your customers and constituents that you were breached, and that you have to also offer identity protection and credit score monitoring and other things like that, because they needed to stop that behavior.
Right.
You have to take away the fear. The purpose of some of that legislation was to make an effort to take away the fear of being a target or a victim, because the business really is the target and the victim, right? Don't get me wrong. The people whose data is taken, they're also victims, but so is the company. And people needed to be able to stand up and say, yeah, we got attacked, but we found it. And as soon as we found it, we took the appropriate actions. And now we want to do our best to make it right. And I think that out of all the things that you can say about laws and legalities and legislation, that's some that I actually agree with. And I think it was actually motivated by the right things.
All right, so let's back up for a second. I have some more advanced questions for you, but I would like to just cover some basic security topics and specifically concepts that get bandied about a lot that I think people might not have a complete understanding of what they mean, why people talk about them, why all of these words are bundled together. And the first one is the concept of people, process, and technology, or people, process, and product if you insist on being alliterative.
So, what about people, process, and technology? Is there a specific context, or are you just saying in general, why is that a thing that we talk about?
Just why is that a thing that we talk about? Why do they get put together in this way so often?
So the concept behind people, process, and technology is that technology is a tool that's leveraged for speed, efficacy. I guess those are probably the big ones. But like anything, like in a supply chain or even a conveyor system, right? Or you think about manufacturing. If you don't understand the process that you're trying to automate or turn into some sort of programmatic solution, you probably aren't solving the challenge that you think you're solving. So in terms of systems engineering and design, right, you map, what is the first thing you do? What do I need to achieve? Is it developing a product? Is it whatever? Pick a topic or pick an outcome. Once you understand what the objective is, and then you look at the bare bones components of what you need to accomplish that objective, you then develop the process flow and say, okay, we take part A, part B, part C, part D. We start putting things together, compiling, painting, polishing, and then at the end, you have a product, and there's a completion of the process. But all of those things need to work in harmony, because there's normally There's data that comes in to people, or people are required to input data of some kind so that the computers can do what they're supposed to do. But they have to be able to do what they're supposed to do within a process. Otherwise, the computer doesn't know what to do, right? So the concept of people, process, and technology has always come to be because you need people to be able to engage in some kind of work. Otherwise, none of us would have jobs, right? And you need to understand the process and have good process so that it is accomplishing the right things. And then you leverage the technology with the people, with the process to help drive speed and efficacy to a desired outcome.
Right, because all those things absolutely have to work together and in harmony in order to get to that desired outcome.
Absolutely.
Next phrase, confidentiality, integrity, accountability.
Accountability, not availability?
Oh man, autocorrect is not my friend.
I just wanted to make sure we were talking about the same thing. Okay, so the CIA triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability, or AIC, availability, integrity, confidentiality, doesn't matter. Point is, it wasn't created by the people in Virginia, has nothing to do with Langley, right? The concept is that everything within the purview of cybersecurity is meant to provide an available system so that it can be data and systems can be accessed by the people that need to access them. And then that data or systems have to be at a acceptable level of integrity, right? Or non-repudiation, meaning you don't want to be able to argue with the data that's being presented to you by the technology, right? And then the technology needs to be, the technology and the data both, and the people that are consuming it need to be able to maintain a certain level of confidentiality. Again, depending on the circumstance and the risk profile associated to the process and the data that's being collected, okay? So different processes, different kinds of data are going to require different levels of confidentiality, different levels of availability, different levels of integrity, okay? If I go to Reddit, I have subjective confidence in what I'm going to read because it's an open public forum where people can just expound on whatever it is that they want to expound on. But if I go to DaveMahoney.com and DaveMahoney.com is purporting to be a cybersecurity professional, I would like to have some level of confidence that when I go to DaveMahoney.com and I read an article or I read a whatever, or I pull a spreadsheet down, that the data or the things that I'm getting were put there by the person that intended to put them there so that I can use them for the purposes that I would like to use them for and have a level of confidence in that data. That's kind of a less important scenario. But let's now move on to something that could be really important. So let's talk about a healthcare system. If I log into my general practitioner's website to look at my health chart information, and I want to see the last couple of visits and I want to look at my blood pressure over time, just because I want to, right? And now what happens when I log into that system and they somehow manage to present me data that belongs to somebody else, and it basically whatever blood pressure readings I get, I should be dead. Well, that would be a little disconcerting, don't you think?
Seems not great, yeah.
It seems bad. Like, you want to get your own health information, and you also don't want that information to be able to be accessible by somebody else. It's private. People don't need to know. It's about me. It's between me and my doctor. That's why you have doctor-patient confidentiality. It's supposed to be between you and that person. It's nobody else's business. Well, that's why the CIA triad exists. If we can't implement technology systems, people, process, technology, and maintain a level of confidentiality, data integrity, and system availability, right? And so meaning when I need to access that information, I can access that information. Have we really achieved our outcome? No. And that's a failed technology system.
Yeah, and I particularly love the way that these two sets of phrases, because people, process, technology is one, and the CIA triad, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, got it that time, work together, really summarizes a lot of what we're going for in securing any kind of a system. To the point you just made, it's a matter of intensity or severity. The local flower shop down the street is going to have different requirements for confidentiality, integrity, and availability than, say, a national bank or a healthcare company. But the way that they can approach it and the policies and procedures that they can put in place the training that they can do for their people, the tools that they use to support the business and protect that data. It's a matter of scale. It's a matter of specifics to that customer's need. But in a general way, this is what we want to protect, and this is how we think we can protect it.
Well, you're absolutely right. But let's take that same example and flip it on its head for a second. So you mentioned the flower shop. So you made a differentiation based on industry, which isn't necessarily wrong, but let's just pull it apart. So let's just say that flower shop, that they have people call in with credit card information and they write it down on a card file. And then whenever that person calls, they say, oh, hey, Mr. Mahoney, we've got your credit card and your billing address and all that kind of stuff on file for you. Do you want us to just charge the card and we'd be more than happy to take care of you? Yeah, sure. That sounds great. And they go into the card file and they pull out my card and they do the point of sale transaction for me. And then they deliver my flowers. Well, that's great. Well, somebody breaks in and steals the card file. They now have my name, full name. They have my address. They have my credit card information. And they probably have, depending on how they store their records or keep their records, they might even have some, history of my floral transactions, maybe even where my next order is going. Now, what if that person decides to show up, grab the order, take it to my house or wherever I'm having it delivered, and, take some sort of nefarious action? Who's at fault? Now, don't get me wrong. The person that took the nefarious action is at fault for sure, but why didn't the florist have better locks on the doors? And now, so now the florist decides, hey, I'm gonna computerize all this because I feel like I get better security with the computer, and I don't want to have to sort through card files all the time. So another example, let's just say that forget the first example. We've moved on. Bad things happened. Physical security failed, and now we're gonna bring technology in. So we're gonna digitize all this data, and I'm gonna put it into a computer in a relational database. And that way, when somebody calls and I just type in their name, boom, pops up this information and I can transact this stuff for them, or I can even go to the website and do it myself. Well, again, same thing. They now have my name, my credit, all the same information. That's a pretty bad thing. They can basically go and do whatever they want. If they use my credit card and somebody doesn't check a license or something, and they've got the security code and everything else, that's a real problem. I now have somebody transacting on my credit card and spending my money. So is there really less risk for me as a consumer, as far as I'm concerned, between that and a healthcare organization? Not really. In my mind, I would rather have my healthcare information stolen than I would my credit card information. My credit cards are my entire, that's how I spend money. I don't use cash ever. Everything goes on a credit card. And I look at every single transaction to make sure that there are things that I approve of. It's my own version of auditing and logging. I review every single credit card transaction. I don't care if people, think I have high blood pressure. I don't have high blood pressure, by the way, but some days.
You sound pretty worked up.
So my point is that industry doesn't matter, right? And type of business doesn't matter. It's all about what kind of data you're collecting and storing. And that is what speaks to levels of privacy and confidentiality and what kind of controls and measures you need to put in place. And if my local florist allowed my credit card information to be leaked because they didn't even do the bare minimum of cybersecurity due care to protect my information, I'm going to be ticked off. And I think people have the right to feel that way.
Yeah. And you'll obviously never do business with them again. So something to keep in mind when, to the point that you're making, every business is important. Every customer's personally identifiable information, and especially financial information, needs to be protected, regardless of the size of the business.
Absolutely. Or the industry of the business. Absolutely. Just because you're a florist, doesn't mean that you're immune from cyber attacks and cyber criminals.
Last phrase, identity and access management.
Identity and access management. Everything that we do requires us to prove who we are to some extent. You have to have an identity and then something to control. And that's why they put pictures on ID cards, right? It's very hard to look at a picture of someone and say, that's just not you, right? Or, that is definitely you, right? When I show my license to somebody, they don't go, that's not you. They go, that's Dave Mahoney. And that's the guy standing in front of me. That's why we do that. Technology works the same way. But instead of having I mean, now we can do pictures, right? We can do biometrics and facial scans and retinal scans and some, hand vein scans and all kinds of stuff, which is why passwordless is becoming more and more of a thing, because we're understanding that a computer identity, which is like a username or an email address, right? Some unique identifier to you matched with a password, it's just no longer enough because people can get those passwords. There's huge password. I get notifications all the time. Oh, hey, your passwords for these websites were compromised in such and such of a breach. As a matter of fact, I recently had to go through my password vault and I had to change over 48 different sets of credentials because they had all been part of some breach. And the passwords were posted on the internet on the dark web. So identity and access management has always been at the crux of proving who you are or stating who you are, and then some kind of challenge for you to prove that is you. And then based on that identity and challenge, you are then given access and authorization to a set of stuff. That's what it's for. But it's changing dramatically, right? Where that it started out with multi-factor. We need to have a username, a password, and then a multi-factor authentication of some kind. So an SMS text message to the code, because you always have your phone on you. But then SMS messages can be intercepted quite easily. So we've moved on, they moved into like hard tokens were out first, but people started moving back to hard tokens. And that's why the multi-factor authentication with the revolving tokens, right? Those tokens change every few seconds, 15, 20, 30 seconds, whatever, depending. But now even, all of that is now becoming brought into question. Is that enough? Well, no, we really need to have 3 factors, right? You need a username, password, a PIN number, and then maybe a biometric. And then, stop changing passwords all the time, right? NIST has now released this thing where, they don't want people to have these ridiculously long, crazy, complex passwords that they have to change every 30 days. You're better off having a complex password, that's relatively decent in length. And that's meant to prevent brute force attacks, right? Have a password that's at least 10 to 16 characters long, because it should take somewhere in the tune of 250,000 years to brute force that password, as long as it's not a dictionary word. It has some level of complexity to it. But that's not enough, right? Because somebody gets into that identity and access management database, and now that password's useless. So let's have another challenge, some sort of other multi-factor. Okay, well, let's send an SMS to their phone. Okay, great, but that can be intercepted. So what else? Well, it's really going to be hard to steal someone's fingerprint. It's going to be a little bit harder to do that. So let's add some biometrics, and then let's add, facial recognition. And so the concept is great. Have a password that you can remember in some kind of almost perpetuity, but then use multiple other challenges that belong to you as an individual, and hopefully only you as an individual, to prove that you are who you say you are, and then grant you the access and authorization to whatever system it is that you're trying to get into.
In light of all that, especially in the market as fastly evolving as I think we both agree that it is, what are some of the most important security-related things that security-minded people, CISOs for larger companies, if that role doesn't exist in smaller companies, somebody that has their finger on the pulse of security, or should at least, what are some of the things that they should be thinking about, but probably aren't?
So the number one thing I'm going to go back to every time is analysis of risk. Conducting a risk assessment based on what your business does, and then what data you collect, whether that be from your employees or customers, or in whatever shape customers may take, or constituents, I guess. Understanding that and then performing a risk assessment against it at least puts you in the ballpark of understanding. I understand that if someone takes it, hopefully, and if you don't know, get a third party or call someone and ask them, right? Hey, do I have significant risk with this data? Look up the definitions of PII, look up the definitions of PHI, look up the definitions of PCI, personally identifiable information, PII, personal health information, PHI, and then obviously personal card information or private card information. I can't remember which one, for PCI. There's a good starting point, right? Understanding what those are and what data constitutes those different things, and then what your responsibilities are in terms of due care to your customers or constituents or employees, right? You don't even have to have a regulatory body over top of you enforcing compliance anymore, right? There's numerous cases out there several years back, it's not like a recent thing, where, judges are granting legal cases, lawsuits for people that didn't exercise due care with the data that they collected, and granting damages to the people that were impacted by them. And, when the companies were like, well, I didn't have any governing body, right? Doesn't matter. The data that you collected and the aggregation of that data, when leaked, was able to cause harm. And so you should have exercised due care to protect that data, and you didn't, based on common security framework guidelines that are out there and available to the public. And therefore you're now culpable and responsible because you took ownership of that data and hosted it on a technology system that you built, supported, maintained, or paid for.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And another thing that comes out of that type of assessment or analysis, I have seen in my, career doing these types of things, I've seen a number of high-level executives of seriously large companies that just didn't have a thorough understanding of the data flow. When information comes in pipe one, something happens, and then we make money. And that's like their only understanding. A lot of these systems have evolved internally over time and could be very inefficient and very unsafe. And people who are responsible in the ways that you're talking about, if you don't do that kind of analysis, you might not even know that there's a problem.
Right. And ignorance is not an excuse by any stretch of the imagination. Every SOC and ISO auditor out there will tell you, just because you don't know doesn't mean that you're exempt from the rules and responsibilities. It's like telling a child, right? A child doesn't know everything from day one. You have to teach them over time. When they make a mistake, you let them know that there's risk associated with their behavior and what the potential outcomes of those risks are, with the anticipation that they're going to change their behavior. And then if it becomes bad enough over time and they don't change their behavior, we usually send those kids to jail.
Where they learn a lot of different lessons.
Or they learn a lot of different lessons. I guess that's also true. You're right. They need to know. And I guess back to our article from this morning, right, is you as a business owner, the royal you have to start taking some responsibility and accountability. If you don't understand, and when I say a risk assessment, by the way, this doesn't even need to be this arduous process. This doesn't even need to take a full day, right? Sit down across a table from a few people at work and say, guys, what data do we collect that if it got out into the wild might cause someone damage? Most of us in this day and age, even just your average Joe, right, with very limited technology background, should be able to say, I really don't want people to have my social security number. Yeah, that's a good point. Do we collect social security numbers? Yes or no? Yes, we do. Okay. What would someone have to do to get your social security number from our system? Well, they'd have to do this. Okay. What are we doing to prevent that? Well, this is what the system looks like, and this is what we do to prevent it at every step of the way. Great. Any gaps, anything that we could do better, any potential for that to go wrong, and one of those controls or countermeasures to fail? Yes or no? Right? Very simple conversation. How hard was that?
Right. And I think that's a good point too, is that a lot of people make some assumptions about security and securing their environment, that it's going to be a slog. It's going to be arduous. It's going to be crazy expensive. And if you come at it carefully and organizationally, everyone's on board, it doesn't have to be like that.
Well, they don't do it from the beginning. They do it after the fact, and then it's hard because they don't want to. They're moving it at speed, right? They're moving at pace. It's like, hey, we're gonna build this car. We're not gonna put glass or a roll cage or an upward part of the frame, right, to protect your head or your body. We're just gonna put 4 wheels and a crazy fast engine in this thing.
Where can I buy it?
We're gonna put you on the road, and then while it's on the road, we're gonna go, this is stupid, unsafe. We should probably add seatbelts, but we're not gonna stop the car to put the seatbelts in. So now you have to somehow install seatbelts while this car is moving at speed.
So for any business that's in any level of security posture, what do you think is the best way for them to address any of these issues? Like, we know we're going to start with some type of analysis and understanding of their business flow and the risks associated. But what are some other things that they can think about, have in the back of their minds as ways to address security type of issues? Maybe more specifically around tools or process or even people.
Sure. So process-wise, security needs to be built into everything. We can sit here and talk about it until we're blue in the face. But the world at large around us, the news, the fact that I had to change 48 passwords that have been in a password vault for years, and I use probably more complex passwords and multi-factor authentication than most people, I still had to go through and change all my passwords, 48 of them, right? And the fact that there's a new cybercrime in the news almost every day, if not multiple, depending on, local news outlets and what makes it to national news, et cetera. Security needs to be built into everything. And if it's not, you're doomed to fail. You're going to end up having some sort of negative action. It's going to happen. And then people are a large part of that. You need to encourage people to adopt that mindset. What are we doing to protect our company? What are we doing to protect our customers? What are we doing to protect ourselves? You need to bake it into people. And then the technology will follow along, right? If you're looking at your risk and assessing it in order of priority, right? Do I care if someone gets your name? No, not really. Do I care if they get your name and just the fact that you do business with me as a company, they can now draw several conclusions about you that could be detrimental if it got out in the wild? Yes. The fact that your name is in my system and my company very publicly provides X service, that fact alone could be damaging to you as a person. Well, that means that just the fact that you have my name is now a very high risk, and you need to do everything in your power to protect my name and the fact that I do business or have a relationship with your company from getting out into the open. So just the name. And now we want to start talking about multiple data. Who in the world just collects names? So you need to understand that, right? Having risks and then prioritized risks, and then putting security at the forefront of technology and systems design and your go-to-market strategy, right? To protect your business, to protect your customers, to protect your employees. The technology will naturally follow along, right? I can't let this data get out. And so if someone is able to get in, so first of all, we need to put in controls to keep people from getting in. And go look at a NIST framework or a CIS framework, right? We can talk about perimeter security, firewalls and application firewalls and antivirus, right? All those things that we've all known about for years and years and years. That's all good stuff to keep people from getting in. But then again, it's like, all right, well, if they get in, let's stop them from taking the data because we don't want them to be able to see the data, right? So let's make sure that we have role-based access control and good security on the data itself in the event that they do get into the environment. And then even if they do get into the environment, let's not let them take the data out because that has a whole new set of challenges. So let's protect that data from getting out. How do we do that? Data loss prevention or data leak prevention, DLP, right? Encryption at rest, all different kinds of things that we can use. But those tools that's a more difficult answer because it's not one size fits all, and every organization is different, and every organization has different budgets and budgetary requirements, and they're all going to have a series of different risks based on whatever their business process is overall. So the technology will follow along. The important parts are understanding what your business purpose is, and then the data that you're collecting to operate that business within your process, and then the risks associated to having that data and your responsibilities of due care and stewardship of the data. I think those are the more important things. The technology is very tertiary, and based on the risk assessments, which are not hard, the technology and the tools will follow along naturally because you'll be able to make intelligent decisions about what due care really is and isn't.
Right. And by doing it that way, you're coming at the problem, identifying it, and really, really filing down what you're trying to protect and how and why. A lot of times, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I see this a lot of times people will just throw money at some hot new product, have it half installed and say, we're safe. And that doesn't do anything except for aggravate your purchasing department, who is like, why are we paying company X $150,000 for something that we don't even like?
Well, given the fact that we both work for a consulting solutions provider and a value-added reseller, I'm all about ticking off procurement people.
Just not ours. They know too much.
Yeah, but in general, I'm usually okay with. No, I'm just kidding. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the death by tool scenario is all too commonplace, and it happens. I mean, not exclusively. I'm sure. I'm speaking in broad generalities here, but it happens because people don't use the methodology that we just discussed, right? And that is understanding by assessing and evaluating risk, and then making the appropriate decisions that align to those, right? If you're spending more money to protect the data than the data is actually worth, you're probably not going to stay in business very long. That doesn't sound like a smart business decision. So you never spend more protecting the data than the data is worth. And this is where the actuarial part of cyber comes into play. If people want to go to this level, because you're dealing with a CFO or a CEO that's very budget conscious. If this data were lost and we add up all the legal fees of what it would take to, get sued and potentially have to pay out, and then take some sort of retroactive action on our systems to beef up security, if that all comes out to less than what you're going to pay for a security solution, okay. I mean, if you're willing to take the brand tarnishing, right? Okay, I can understand why you would make a decision to maybe not take that solution, or go find a solution that does exactly what you need it to at the right level that you need it to provide you the protection that you need that is cost effective. That should be the decision criteria, not, well, let's just go buy a tool because we need this. Need it to do what? Why do you need it to do that? And exactly how do you need it to do that? That's why those implementations, you said they get half installed. The policy and the governance is too broad to drive the mandates for compliance that security and IT professionals need to be effective at their jobs. That's usually what happens. I've gone through policy documents where you read the policy document and it says, we are going to do this, and this is our policy. And the actual steps of how we do that are listed in this other policy document. And then you go to that other policy document and it starts spouting off almost the same material, but maybe at a little bit of a different level with a lot of, just more process and procedure. But then the actual implementation or steps or detailed steps are referenced in another document. And then you go grab that document and maybe you finally get down to the nitty gritty of, we need this system to do these things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe. A lot of times you can go through that reference of a policy, reference this policy, that policy, this web of policy documents, 5, 7, 10 layers deep. That's probably not a good situation to be in, because you're just death by paper at that point. And that's probably why you have people say that, there are cybersecurity professionals out there that do nothing but push paper, because they wrote a bunch of policy documents that all reference each other in this great web, but then never actually told somebody, go do this, and then verified the execution was there and it was actually achieving the goal that it was meant to achieve. And that's compliance. Did it achieve compliance? Yes, no, or maybe. If you can't answer that question after setting all of that policy and creating all that governance, you failed.
So we're coming up on the end of our hour here. Is there anything else you want to add before we wind it down?
I think just a quick recap, right? I mean, the cybersecurity world right now is insane, because the environment is just so threat rich. There has not been a single, my feeds on my personal, blogs and websites and stuff they're just overloaded at this point with, breach here, breach there, breach here. I mean, it's insane. Oh yeah. And Bill and Melinda Gates are getting divorced somehow made it into my cybersecurity feed. I'm not quite sure why, but that was interesting. But it's such a threat rich environment, so that means that these cyber criminals are obviously being effective, or they wouldn't be drawn to this. So let's stop them from being so effective, and let's stop putting security at the bottom of every diagram and at the bottom of every conversation, and let's move it up a little bit farther. I want to have my business objective be this. In order to do that, I have to do these things. In order to do these things, we have to have this level of security and due care. Otherwise, we're going to run into trouble. Not insurance. We are going to do these things because we are going to run into trouble. If that's not the mindset in this day and age in 2021, chances are you're going to run into that trouble that you're trying not to run into. And the number one way to do that is, once you establish this is what we need to do, and this is kind of how we need to get there from a business perspective, immediately go into risk assessment. And it does not have to be hard. You do not have to make risk assessment difficult. You can do it based on financials. You can do it based on actuarial tables if you want to. There are people out there that need to do that so that they can prove that they're spending money in the right places and need that level of due diligence. That's fine. We can totally go that route. I can help you do it. Anexinet can help you do it. But there are other more right-sized ways for different businesses to just sit across the table and have a conversation and then make risk assessments and judgments that you can document professionally and adequately that will hold up to any audit, external or internal. So it doesn't have to be an arduous process, but conduct a risk assessment based on your technology and the data and the business purposes that you're trying to provide. And then from there, that can all drive the right size technology and security program and solution that you need for your operation. And that's why I'm really excited about what we're doing and our cyber security assessments, risk assessments, business impact analysis. We have all of these capabilities in-house, and I want people to take advantage of them more than they already are, which I'm very pleased with their level of response and engagement that we've gotten on these services.
All right. That's a solid conclusion. Just before we go, I would like to let anybody else know, if they have been doing the Googling that I've been doing, that DaveMahoney.com does not actually refer to this Dave Mahoney. The DaveMahoney.com website refers to a real estate agent in the Rhode Island and Massachusetts area who has some very lovely Cape Cods. So that's a free plug. If you're up in that area, I encourage you to reach out to him.
I wonder if I can get some royalties off of that. Later, Chris.